There are moments in life that stretch seconds into eternity. The split second when glass hits the floor. The pause between a heartbeat and a scream. For me, it was the sound of my wife's body hitting the cold, hard tile at gate C13. It was supposed to be a quiet return home, our first Christmas together in 3 years. Karen, 7 months pregnant with our daughter, had insisted on meeting me at the terminal, despite my protests. I told her I could take a cab, that she should rest, but she'd only smiled and said, "I want you to see me first." We had planned everything. A weekend in Virginia before I'd return to Fort Belvoir. Then she'd fly home and stay with her sister for the final stretch of her pregnancy. It was our first time traveling together since the wedding. We were supposed to board Flight 762 to Charleston in 20 minutes. Karen had a small carry-on bag, and as always, her sense of humor. She'd tied a short strand of rainbow-colored lights around the handle of her suitcase. A playful touch, just enough to catch my eye in the crowd. "So you don't miss me, in a sea of black Samsonites," she joked. But someone else didn't find it amusing. Her name was Miranda Steele, head of security for Liberty Terminal, clad in a sharp-pressed blazer and a name badge that seemed more like a warning label than an ID. With a clipboard in one hand and judgment in her eyes, she stormed toward Karen just as I was stepping out of the Starbucks with 2 cups of peppermint tea. I saw the whole thing from 20 feet away, too far to stop it, too close to ever forget. "You can't bring that onto the plane," Miranda barked, pointing at the tiny lights on Karen's bag. "FAA regulations prohibit unauthorized electronic devices in carry-on items. Remove them, now." Karen, ever composed, replied gently, "They're battery-operated, ma'am. Sealed pack, non-flammable. I've flown with them before. TSA already cleared it." But Miranda wasn't listening. "You think rules don't apply to you because you're pregnant?" she snapped, stepping closer. "Well, let me be clear. I am the rules in this terminal, and I said take them off." Karen took a step back, both hands instinctively cradling her stomach. "Ma'am, please don't come any closer. I can—" Then it happened. A sharp shove to the shoulder, a gasp, and Karen stumbled backward. I dropped everything. The tea, the phone, my restraint, and sprinted toward her. I watched, helpless, as she tumbled over the black duffel of another passenger and crashed hard against the tile floor. Her head struck with a sickening thud. Time slowed, my boots thundered across the floor as if through molasses. Everything else blurred, except her. She lay curled on her side, clutching her stomach, eyes clenched in pain. "Karen?" I dropped to my knees beside her, years of battlefield medical training snapping into place. "Breathe. I'm here. You're okay. I've got you." Her lips trembled. "It's the baby. Ethan, Don't move," I said, my voice calm but unshakable. I slid my jacket beneath her head, shielding her from the cold floor. I assessed her airway, checked for bleeding, touched her belly lightly. "I'm calling an ambulance." Behind me, a commotion was starting, people gathering, phones raised, whispers rising. But the voice that rose above them all was Miranda's, shrill and unapologetic. "She tripped over that bag. It wasn't my fault," she snapped at an airline staffer. "I was enforcing policy." She got aggressive. I turned my head, eyes like ice. "You laid hands on a pregnant woman," I said, standing to my full height. "I saw you shove her. So did half the terminal. And the overhead security camera." Her face twitched. "That's absurd." She was being combative. I stepped forward. "And now you've assaulted a federal employee's wife in a public transit facility." She blinked. "A federal?" "Lieutenant Colonel Ethan Cole," I said, pulling my ID from my breast pocket. "U.S. Army, 5th Special Operations Support Battalion." Her face paled a shade. My fingers flew over my phone screen. I scrolled down to a contact labeled General M. Hayes, Fort Belvoir Command. I tapped call. "General Hayes, this is Cole. I'm at Liberty Terminal. My wife has been assaulted by airport security. She's 7 months pregnant." A beat of silence. "Yes, sir. Gate C13, ambulance en route. Civilian response slow. I'm requesting support." I ended the call. Miranda stared, confused. "Who did you just call?" I didn't answer, because in 3 minutes the entire terminal would know. The sound of sirens in the distance did little to calm the fire building inside me. I knelt back beside Karen, shielding her from the eyes and whispers now encircling us. She was still conscious, her breath shallow but steady, one trembling hand pressed to her side. Her dark curls clung to her forehead, damp with sweat and fear. "Stay with me," I whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Just focus on my voice. Help is on the way. I'm okay, she muttered. The baby? Ethan, is she moving? I swallowed the rising lump in my throat and pressed 2 fingers gently against her belly. Then relief. A flutter beneath my hand. She's moving, I said, my voice breaking. She's strong, just like her mom. Karen's eyes fluttered shut for a second, then opened again with a soft, tearful smile. I looked up, and that's when I noticed the crowd had doubled. Passengers with carry-ons and cell phones stood in a loose ring around us. TSA agents hovered uneasily near their podiums, and Miranda Steele, arms crossed, jaw tight, stood just outside the circle, flanked by 2 junior officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. One of them, a young woman with nervous eyes, took a hesitant step toward me. Sir, paramedics are about a minute out, but you should know, terminal security is saying this was an accident. Of course they are, I said, nodding toward the ceiling. There's a dome cam directly above gate C13. Get someone from airport operations. I want that footage secured, now, before it disappears. The young agent blinked, then jogged off. Good. At least someone still had integrity. Behind me, Miranda scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. This is all being blown out of proportion, she tripped. You're trying to escalate a simple policy dispute into military-level drama. I turned to face her. You assaulted a pregnant woman in a federally controlled transportation facility. That's not policy. That's a felony. Her face hardened, but a flicker of something else crept into her eyes. Uncertainty. Fear. And then, it began. The sound wasn't loud at first. A low, distant hum, almost like heavy wind. But as it grew louder, conversations stopped. Heads turned. People moved toward the large windows that lined the east side of the terminal. It was unmistakable. The thunder of heavy-duty military engines, not commercial planes, echoing across the tarmac. Miranda turned toward the noise, squinting. What the hell is that? I didn't respond, because I knew exactly what was coming. Within seconds, the first olive-drab Humvee rolled into view, headlights cutting through the gray morning haze. Behind it, a military ambulance, followed by 2 tactical transport trucks with Fort Belvoir markings, and then 2 more. A total of 5 vehicles, each rolling with deliberate force and precision, painted with the insignia of the 5th Special Operations Support Battalion. People gasped. Phones were raised. A collective hush fell over the terminal. Then, the rear Humvee came to a halt directly outside the terminal doors. The passenger door swung open, and out stepped General Marcus Hayes. Even in full combat uniform, he walked like a man who belonged in command. 6'4", broad-shouldered, every inch of him exuded purpose. His eyes scanned the scene, stopping the moment they found me. He moved fast. Flanked by a team of military medics carrying gear, he pushed through the crowd with an authority that made even the TSA agents stand aside. As he approached, I stood and saluted instinctively. At ease, Colonel, he said, voice deep and steady. Then he looked down at Karen, who tried to sit up. Dr. Cole, he added gently, you've taken a hell of a fall. Karen blinked. General Hayes, you didn't have to. He cut her off with a kind smile. Don't worry, we were already en route for Winter Guardian mobilization. We just made a small detour. The medics dropped to their knees and immediately began examining Karen, checking vitals, stabilizing her neck, carefully preparing her for stretcher transport. The general turned to me. Report. 7 months pregnant. Blunt trauma to back and head. No loss of consciousness. Baby's active. Ambulance ETA under a minute. Civilian security intervened aggressively over a non-regulation claim. I witnessed the assault. So did multiple bystanders. Incident was likely captured on both airport cameras and phones. Hayes nodded. You did the right thing, Rico. I glanced back toward Miranda Steele and caught the moment her smug composure cracked. She took a step forward, voice rising with a shrill edge of panic. This is a civilian matter. You can't just bring military forces into a public airport like this. It's an overreach of jurisdiction. General Hayes slowly turned to her. Ma'am, one of my officers' wives has been assaulted. At this moment, my only priority is ensuring her safety and that of her unborn child. Miranda opened her mouth. But before she could fire back, a young military lieutenant approached the general, tablet in hand. Sir, he said, we've secured the footage from the terminal's overhead camera. Playback confirms physical contact and deliberate use of force by the suspect. Hayes took the tablet, reviewed the footage in silence. When he handed it back, his face was carved from stone. "I assume airport police are inbound?" he asked. I nodded. "Confirmed. They're 2 minutes out." Hayes stepped aside as medics gently lifted Karen onto the stretcher. She reached for my hand. "The lights," she whispered, her usual dry humor peeking through the pain. "I was just trying to make my bag festive." I smiled for the first time that morning. "Next time, we'll put lights on both our bags, and the whole damn plane." She laughed weakly, then winced. I squeezed her hand. "Hang in there, we're almost through this." As the stretcher rolled toward the incoming civilian ambulance, the general turned back to Miranda Steele, who now stood alone, clipboard trembling in her hands. "Airport police will take your statement shortly," he said, "and you may want to call your attorney." The hum of the stretcher wheels faded into the distance, swallowed by the sterile glow of the terminal's overhead lights. As Karen was guided toward the ambulance, cradled by professionals who knew the stakes of every second, I stood at the center of Gate C-13, no longer just a husband or an officer, but something else entirely, the witness. The line in the sand. Around me, silence still clung to the air like fog, broken only by the quiet murmurs of bystanders trying to make sense of what they'd seen. And Miranda Steele? She stood statue still, clipboard now hanging limp by her side. Gone was the brash woman barking orders, snapping fines, and flexing her fake badge of authority. All that remained was a woman grasping for a version of reality that no longer obeyed her script. She turned sharply to the young lieutenant who had handed over the tablet. "You had no right to access that footage. That's classified airport security property. I'm reporting you." The lieutenant didn't flinch. "Ma'am, Liberty Terminal falls under federal jurisdiction. And as of 5 minutes ago, this is a federal incident involving military personnel. We followed protocol." That word, protocol, seemed to strike her like a slap. Her mouth opened to reply, but her voice refused to emerge. For the first time, her silence said more than her tirades ever had. Then a new sound pierced the quiet, the unmistakable ding of a gate speaker system activating. A voice, calm, neutral, but urgent, came over the loudspeaker. "Attention all passengers at Gate C-13. Due to an ongoing medical and security incident, boarding has been temporarily delayed. We thank you for your patience and ask that you remain behind the designated barrier lines until further notice. Airport police and military personnel are on site. Updates will follow shortly." As the message ended, I saw phones rise again. This time not just recording, but live streaming. A few reporters who had been lingering for a holiday travel piece now moved closer, their cameras already rolling. The story had legs now, and Miranda knew it. She looked at me, her voice brittle. "You think you're going to destroy me with this?" "No," I said calmly, stepping closer. "You already did that yourself. I'm just making sure no one else gets hurt before someone finally holds you accountable." "None of this would have happened if your wife had just followed the rules," she spat. I raised an eyebrow. "The rule about no colored lights on a suitcase?" "She mocked the standards of this terminal," Miranda hissed. "I maintain order." "No, you maintain power," I replied, low and steady. "There's a difference, and today you learned it the hard way." Just then, a pair of airport police officers arrived, weaving through the crowd with authority. One of them, a tall woman with silver hair and a clipboard of her own, though far more legitimate, approached. "Name?" she asked Miranda. "Miranda Steele, head of security, Liberty Terminal." The officer nodded, flipping open a folder. "Miss Steele, we have reviewed footage from terminal surveillance camera C-13 and received multiple witness statements. You are being placed under investigation for assault, resulting in potential harm to a pregnant civilian on federal transportation property." Miranda's face crumpled, a strange mix of indignation and disbelief. "This is insane. I am security. I don't get investigated." "You do now," the officer replied. "Please hand over your credentials." Miranda hesitated for just a beat too long. Then the officer spoke again, firmer. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Slowly, with trembling fingers, Miranda unclipped her badge and handed it over. Her voice cracked. "I was enforcing policy. I was just enforcing policy." But no one was listening anymore. Behind her, one of the airport police stepped forward and began gently placing her wrists behind her back. As the zip ties clicked shut, A collective gasp ran through the crowd. Some cheered quietly. Others just stood there, stunned, as the woman who once strutted through this place like a queen was now being escorted down the very same corridor she once used to intimidate others. Before they led her away, Miranda turned her head one last time, her eyes meeting mine. There was no more arrogance in them, no more control, just a dawning recognition that this wasn't just about her, that a system had cracked. And she was the crack everyone would remember. Outside, the ambulance door slammed shut, and I watched as the flashing lights began to fade down the runway side service road. Karen was in good hands. I knew that now. General Hayes stepped beside me, his arms folded. "I've seen insurgents backpedal faster than that woman," he muttered. I managed a half smile. "Thank you for coming, sir. I didn't think." "You didn't need to think," he interrupted. "You acted. That's what leaders do." He paused, watching the departing squad car. "She'll face charges, no question, and if the footage goes viral, which it will, there'll be an internal review, federal oversight, and probably a few forced retirements." "I didn't do this for revenge," I said. I needed to protect my wife." "And you did," Hayes said, "but you also protected every other woman who might have been her next target. Don't forget that." We both stood in silence for a beat. Then he turned to me, voice softer. "Rico, go be with your family. I'll handle the fallout. We've got your 6. I nodded, throat tight. "Thank you, sir." As I walked toward the hospital exit gate, escorted now by a dozen eyes filled with gratitude, curiosity, or admiration, I realized something deeper. This wasn't just about the woman who fell. It was about the walls that finally cracked when someone stood up and said, "That's enough." By the time I reached the emergency bay of St. Catherine's Medical Center, Karen was already surrounded by a wall of calm efficiency. 1 OB on standby, 2 trauma nurses assessing her vitals, and a military medic I recognized from our Kandahar deployment, quietly relaying data to both civilian and military channels. They weren't just treating my wife. They were protecting her. And thank God, they were fast. A full battery of scans and monitoring followed. I never let go of her hand. Hours passed in a fluorescent haze, beeping monitors, concerned whispers, and the familiar rhythm of clipped military jargon weaving through hospital hallways. I'd spent years in triage zones, but nothing compared to sitting helplessly in the waiting chair while the woman you love and the child you haven't even met yet are caught in limbo. Finally, the door opened. Dr. Kelly, head OB, entered with a soft smile and tired eyes. "She's gonna be okay," he said. "There's a mild lumbar strain, a small hematoma near the left scapula, nothing requiring surgery. No signs of placental detachment or fetal distress. Your daughter's heart rate is strong." My knees gave out just a little as the air returned to my lungs. I'd forgotten I was holding it. "She's stable?" I asked. "She is, both of them," he replied. "We'll keep her overnight for observation, but she'll go home tomorrow. Strict bed rest for a week. After that, just no more airport brawls." I exhaled a short laugh, the first one that didn't feel forced. When I stepped into her room, Karen was propped up in bed, pale but smiling, one hand resting protectively over her belly. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "You should have seen the look on her face," she said softly. "When she realized General Hayes walked in, I swear I thought she'd evaporate." I laughed. "You always make an entrance, even flat on your back." We shared a quiet moment. No phones, no noise, no outrage, just us. That night, the hospital placed us in a private suite, thanks to a few quiet calls from Fort Belvoir. As I tucked her in, Karen touched my wrist gently. "She wasn't just one person," she said. "She was a culture. A whole system that punishes anything that doesn't conform. Lights on a bag? That's all it took." "I know," I whispered. "But we're not done." The next morning, just after sunrise, we pulled up to Liberty Terminal in a government vehicle arranged for discharge. I'd expected a quiet exit, something low profile. What I got instead was something else entirely. As our car turned into the staff-only entrance, Gate C13 had been transformed. A stretch of the terminal wall had been wrapped with ribbon and garland. Hundreds of LED lights strung from the ceiling like snowflakes. Red, green, gold, blue. Every color Karen had been told violated policy now danced proudly across the entryway. At the center of the display stood 24 uniformed soldiers from the 5th Support Battalion, the same crew we'd trained with last winter, each one holding a strand of lights or a small bouquet of red poinsettias. I froze. Karen gasped, "Ethan, what is this?" As I helped her from the vehicle, a familiar voice boomed across the terminal. "Welcome home, Dr. Cole," General Hayes called. "Your battalion thought the gate could use a little color correction." Laughter rippled through the group. Karen's hand covered her mouth as her eyes welled. "They did this for me?" "No," I said. "They did it because you stood tall when someone tried to make you small. They just followed your lead." General Hayes stepped forward, saluted her, then handed her a small box. Inside was a commemorative challenge coin engraved with her name and the date. "Not every battle is fought overseas," he said. "Some are fought in silence, in line, in policy. But every battle for dignity is worth winning." Karen broke. She wept, the quiet, tired, beautiful kind of cry that only comes when you know you're safe again. I held her close, and that's when the terminal staff began emerging, quietly, cautiously. A janitor with a rolling mop cart stopped and gave a small wave. 2 TSA agents brought a wrapped tray of fresh-baked cookies. A flight attendant from our original flight came up to Karen with a thermos of chamomile tea. And behind them the crowd grew, not gawking this time, not watching, joining. For the first time in Liberty Terminal's memory, the barrier between enforcer and traveler dissolved, under lights that weren't authorized, weren't regulation, and weren't in any handbook. Just lights that meant something real. Later that day, while Karen rested at the airport medical suite, I was pulled aside by someone unexpected. Deputy Director Ruth Calloway, Internal Affairs Liaison for the Department of Transportation. "Colonel Cole," she said, extending her hand. "The footage, the witness reports, it's all confirmed. Ms. Steele's actions violated multiple federal standards. The DOJ is opening a formal investigation into Liberty Terminal's disciplinary structure. Effective immediately, she's been suspended pending charges." "And the system she built?" I asked. "Will be dismantled," she said, "from the inside out." She handed me a document. "We'd like you to review this proposal. An independent board to oversee airport security conduct and policy accountability. Civilian-military hybrid, rotating leadership." I blinked. "You want me to?" "We want your wife," she said with a soft smile. "But I suspect she'd want you on it too." That night, in our quiet hotel room near the base, I sat beside Karen. Lights dimmed low. Her hand rested on her belly. Our baby kicked once, like punctuation. "She's strong," Karen whispered. "So are you," I replied. Then we both looked at the TV, where a headline flashed. "Airport security manager faces charges after pushing pregnant woman. Military intervention caught on camera sparks nationwide review." Karen turned to me, her voice soft but fierce. "Let's make sure no woman ever gets pushed again." I nodded. We weren't done. The next few days unfolded like something between a courtroom drama and a quiet revolution. Liberty Terminal, once a place known only for its tight connections and TSA delays, was now the epicenter of a national conversation. News anchors replayed the footage in slow motion. The moment Miranda Steele shoved Karen, the military convoy arriving, and the sweeping lights that followed. But the real transformation didn't happen on TV. It happened in the hearts of the people who worked there. Day 3. Day 3. Liberty Terminal Conference Hall B, a makeshift town hall, had been arranged. Not by federal order, not by press demand, but by the airport staff themselves. It started with a memo from baggage handlers, then gate agents, then pilots. Within 48 hours, nearly 600 employees, from janitors to airline execs, packed into Hall B. Karen and I sat quietly in the second row. She in a loose navy maternity dress, her hands still resting instinctively over the curve of her belly. General Hayes sat beside us, arms folded, flanked by 2 young medics who had refused to leave her side since that morning. Up front stood Ruth Calloway, clipboard in hand, microphone in the other. "This isn't a disciplinary meeting," she said, voice steady. "This is a reckoning and an opportunity." She nodded toward Karen. "And it started because someone decided a few colored lights were more important than a human being. That ends today." What followed was raw, unfiltered. A young black TSA agent spoke first. "I've worked here 4 years. You have no idea how many times I've seen Miranda target women who looked too loud, too casual, or too unapologetic. I didn't have the power to stop her. But now, maybe we do. A white gate agent from Delta stood next. She once wrote me up for emotional tone because I hugged a crying passenger who had just lost her husband. Said it wasn't professional conduct. A janitor shared how Miranda had forbidden him from wearing his daughter's handmade keychain on his belt. Said it was unseemly. That keychain was the last thing she gave me before passing. Each story chipped away at a system that had for too long hidden behind policy. And each time, Karen just listened. No spotlight. No speech. Just presence. Until someone called her name. A middle-aged woman in a crisp uniform, Cynthia Monroe, head of United Ground Ops, took the mic. "Dr. Cole," she said, voice trembling, would you consider saying a few words? I think we all need to hear from the woman who stood up to the silence." Karen hesitated, then nodded. She rose slowly, helped by my hand, and a breath that steadied like a soldier entering battle. She walked to the podium alone. Bookmark. Karen's speech. The moment everything changed. "You don't know me. And honestly, before last week, I didn't know most of you either. I'm not here because I'm brave. I'm here because I was shoved. But what happened afterward, that wasn't about me, it was about you. I watched a military convoy roll into a commercial airport, not for war, but for a woman. Not for power, but for protection. And I watched what happens when a system built on fear meets a community ready to remember its humanity. What happened to me could have happened to anyone. And for many of you, it already has. Maybe not with bruises, but in 1,000 invisible cuts. So today I'm asking, let's not waste this moment. Let's rewrite the story of what an airport can be. A place where safety doesn't come at the cost of dignity. A place where regulation doesn't silence compassion. A place where uniforms protect, they don't intimidate. And let this be the first terminal where humanity takes off first. Silence. Then, applause. And not polite applause. Not the kind that fades quickly. It roared. Ground staff clapped with tear-filled eyes. Pilots stood up. TSA agents raised their hands in the air. Even Ruth Calloway wiped a tear as she stepped away from the podium. And in that moment, Liberty Terminal was no longer a place of fear. It was becoming something new. A movement takes flight. Over the next week, the following changes were announced. Miranda Steele was formally charged with third-degree assault and federal civil rights violations. The Liberty Terminal Dignity Task Force was established, with Karen Cole as its first civilian co-chair. New guidelines were issued across the state's 5 major airports. Human-first protocols, including empathy training, escalation review, and real-time anonymous reporting. Military-civilian partnerships were expanded to protect vulnerable travelers, including expectant mothers, veterans with PTSD, and refugees with language barriers. By the end of the month, the FAA had launched an initiative called Terminals of Trust, modeled after Karen's case. And the airport? Well, the next time we flew out of Liberty Terminal, a month later, Gate C-13 had a new name. The Karen Cole Honor Gate, where every journey deserves dignity. It was quiet. We were at home, finally home, in a small rented house near Fort Belvoir. After everything, she wanted to give birth somewhere simple. Somewhere that didn't smell like jet fuel or antiseptic or bureaucracy. Just soft cotton sheets, warm light, and the feeling of peace. And yet, peace would not come easily. At 2:47 a.m., she grabbed my hand with a pressure that felt like gravity collapsing. "It's time," she whispered. 2 hours later, our daughter took her first breath. Eliana Hope Cole, 6 pounds. Wide eyes. A voice that screamed like she already had something to say. I held her in my arms, and for the first time since the moment Karen fell, since the chaos, the flashbulbs, the charges, the hearings, the headlines, I let go. Tears I didn't know I'd stored for months finally fell, and I whispered into her tiny ear, "The world will know you came after the storm, but you are the reason the light stayed." 3 weeks later, Liberty Terminal, we returned as a family of 3. Karen wore a soft scarf and held Eliana to her chest, wrapped in a blanket stitched with stars. I carried the diaper bag and a folded letter I'd received just days earlier. As we entered Gate C-13, something stopped us in our tracks. It wasn't just the nameplate, Karen Cole Honor Gate. It was what hung above it. a massive canopy of rainbow-colored lights stretching across the terminal ceiling like the northern lights had decided to land. Every color, every shape, every size. Beside the gate stood a small plaque, in honor of Karen Cole, who reminded us that rules without compassion are just cages, and that every light, no matter how small, deserves to shine. Karen covered her mouth, but that wasn't all. To our left, a group of airport employees began gathering. Dozens of them, some still in uniform, others in jeans and lanyards. They stood in a circle. One by one, they reached into their pockets and turned on small strands of colored lights, clipped to badges, backpacks, neckties, even baby strollers. Not because it was policy, because it was culture now. The tradition begins. A week later, the FAA made it official. Every December, airports across the country would host the Festival of Lights and Dignity, a new tradition where travelers and staff could display colored lights to honor passengers who had experienced discrimination and overcome it. Some lit their bags, some wore wristbands, some printed the initials of loved ones they lost to indifference. And every year, Liberty Terminal's Gate C-13 kicked off the festival with a small ceremony, simple, human, honest. Karen was invited back as a speaker. Every year, she refused the podium. She preferred to stand among the people, just one more light in the crowd. Bukroi. Closing scene. 2 years later. I sit on a bench at Liberty Terminal, Eliana on my lap, now 2 years old and full of sass. She points to a decoration above the gate. "Daddy," she says, "look, those are Mommy's lights." I smile. "They are, and one day you'll hang your own." She squints. "Even if they're pink?" "Especially if they're pink." Just then, Karen returns from the coffee shop, holding 3 peppermint teas. She hands me mine, kisses Eliana's forehead, then sits beside us. And in that moment, no news crew, no convoy, no courtroom, just the 3 of us beneath 1,000 shining lights, I realize something. It wasn't the fall that changed everything. It was what came after. The rising, the reckoning, the redemption. And the reminder that when one person dares to stand up, the world doesn't just watch. Sometimes, it follows. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness is courage, and that one voice can change an entire system, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. At Aiva Stories, we bring you powerful, true stories of justice, resilience, and everyday people who dared to rise. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment that matters. Because sometimes, one story can light the way for many. You're not just watching, you're part of something bigger.